when you want to achieve equality and then you do, and then you change that want from equality to extraordinary treatment, that's where the problem comes in. So if everybody wanted to be equal, then it should be fine to make fun of everybody equally. But some people don't stand for that anymore. And that's where the problem comes in. And comedy needs to be exempt from that, because comedy has traditionally always had a victim. And even if that victim is, a marginalized group or a member of a marginalized group, this notion of punching down isn't really a thing anymore, because the tide has switched so much.
You are listening to TMI for the week of February 11th, 2019. On the show today, Aaron Berg is the host of Frantic Mondays at the Stand NYC. Can be seen every night doing stand-up in New York City. On the TV show 24 Hour Rental, airing on Hulu, he co-hosts the video podcast In Hot Water on Compound Media. How are you?
Apologies, I'm so late. My life is incredibly busy, but I'm glad we can do this for a bit.
So am I. Why is your life so busy?
I have a wife and a child and a career, and just moved to a new place. And it's crazy. I'm working on the road this weekend, but I drive home every night, so it's nuts.
You work every night doing stand-up?
Yeah, most every night.
What happens if you take a night off or a week off?
Well, you get less good. One night off is, I'll take one night off usually every week now, which I never used to do. But a week off, I can do it, and it rests you after a while, but you also feel less funny.
It's just how you feel. Do you, because you get out of the swing of it, or you're not writing new stuff because you've taken the week off, or do you lose your nerve, or what happens?
I think you lose your comfortability. But I think it is, as you mentioned, all in your head. David Mamet had this great quote where he would talk about, the difference between what you think is the best show of your life and the worst show of your life is very minimal, especially through the eyes of the audience.
Yeah.
There's barely a difference.
I know from doing a podcast that it's usually the shows that I think went the worst that are the ones that actually go the best. But
really?
Well, yeah. Yeah.
How many podcasts have you done? What number are you at?
We're at about 80 here.
At 80?
Yeah.
And you do one a week?
Yeah.
And you do, you've had David Feldman on, which
yeah.
I'm a huge fan of, and I had sex with him in a steam bath, and that's how we met.
Right, I think that was mentioned maybe on the podcast.
Yeah, wouldn't that be horrible if that was a real story and people actually grasped onto it? I think podcasts are the new thing now. It's the most fun thing to do, isn't it?
It is. There's a lot of them, and only a few get listed in the iTunes section as everybody's corralled towards the famous ones, the Joe Rogans right. and the... I hear you can bench press Joe Rogan. Is that true?
It depends on what he weighs now. Yeah, I could probably bench press Joe Rogan. So could most people. I bet he's only like 225, 240. He's very bench pressable. I get compared to him a lot because we look similar.
Yeah.
And, I think we delve into similar subject matter. You guys had a huge incident in Canada yesterday regarding your comedy. Do you follow your comedy there?
I try to. What happened?
There's a comedy festival in Moncton,
right?
Called the Moncton Comedy Festival. A comic went on and did a trans joke.
Okay.
And I think his joke was, I've done some research into trans people, and most are men to women, which means in 5 years, female sports will be watchable. That was his joke, and then I gathered that there was a trans person there that got very offended, and the comics go after the other comics now to make sure that freedom of speech is being hindered as much as possible.
Does that factor into your leaving Canada because of the hate law?
I left Canada because I just thought my career would be better suited to New York. I thought I was more of a New York comic. I'd always been enamored by the possibility of a bohemian lifestyle that New York offered, and I was willing to struggle and suffer. And I always just thought it meant more to make it in America than it did in Canada, which is like hypocritical, because now when I go home, any success that I have celebrated at home, it makes me feel really happy. But when I have success in America, I feel like an immigrant living the American dream, which is a great thing. But I left because I felt like there was a ceiling on the type of comedy that I do in Canada. I had a great support system. Mark Breslin, who runs all the Yuck Yucks, he was a very good friend and a fan as well, and he'd help me. But it felt like you couldn't really be that dirty without freedom of speech, and it's not a thing in Canada. When you look at guys like Mike Ward that have been sued, and what's happening now with the fallout and comics going after other comics, it's weird. And people are applying for governmental funding for stand-up comedy in Canada right now.
Maybe that's a good thing to support the Canadian industry, or no?
I think it's great to support the arts, but to me it seems odd, because America, I guess, is a capitalist system now. So it's like, if you're really good, you're going to make money and you won't have to worry about it. And if you're okay good, you'll make okay money. And if you suck, you're not going to make any money. That's the delineation that capitalism offers, and I feel like that's a good system. A lot of people don't, but it's just weird to me that the government needs to fund stand-up comedy when all you really need is a microphone and your voice. It's not like theater, where you need extensive sets and a whole bunch of actors and directors, and you got to pay everybody to put up these works of art. Stand-up can be done with just a microphone in the middle of a town square.
I want to ask you about the Toronto scene. There's quite a long list of comedians who rolled through, either came from Toronto or worked the Toronto comedy scene. Is it a thing?
So many really good comics came through the Toronto scene. Mike McDonald, who was a legend. There were guys that worked that weren't household names. Kenny Robinson, Mike Wilmot. And then, of course, like the stars that people know, like the Jim Carreys and the Howie Mandels. But yeah, it was a scene, but now it's problematic at best. I think that there's a lot of good comics there, and I think there is, but I think that there's the problem with stand-up in the wide open spaces where they're like, and there's safe space shows and stuff like that. And I'm the exact opposite of that. I'm thriving because of those shows. Where there's safe space shows, I thrive because I'm the exact opposite. So now my stuff, it can be funny, but it's also that added level of shock where it's like, oh, this guy's not even allowed to say this stuff anymore. So it kind of ups those laughs. It throws an extra thing in there. And it's also a niche market now, whereas before I would have been written off as like, that guy's a dirty comic. Now they're like, oh, that guy's a dirty comic.
Well, I got to tell you,
get more excited about it.
Doing a little research on your products, and one thing I noticed, it's sort of like Feldman, there's two things. I laugh, but I have to shake my head at the same time. And it's as if you won't tell a joke unless I have to both laugh and shake my head at myself in shame at the same time. Yeah. It's delicious. It
Thank
really
you.
is.
I really enjoy it. And it took years to get to that point, but I do really enjoy it. And I love doing it in front of diverse audiences and people that you don't think would laugh at it. And it's really nice to have that. It's more than just laughter. So to me,
that's
it's a great thing. And I don't think people are leaving going, hey, we need to change the world. I just think people laugh on such a guttural level, which makes me feel so good.
Now, you mentioned the Moncton Comedy Festival. I thought in my looking at your dates, I thought you were scheduled for the Moncton Comedy Festival.
No, I did it, I think, last year or 2 years ago. But this was breaking news on Facebook last night. And I'm always intrigued to watch this stuff because I've gotten in trouble before for stuff, in Canada especially. But to go back to your original question before I get too sidetracked, I think Toronto has a great scene, but I also think that so many people have been let into comedy that didn't really earn their places. And I think that was the original motivating factor, people trying to work their way in through marginalized communities into the mainstream, saying, hey, why aren't there more women on this show? Why aren't there more gay men on this show? And the answer used to be, well, we book the funniest people. But then there was a switch where people had started to say, oh, it's because we need to book more. We need to make quotas. We need to book a whole bunch of people so that we have a wide variety on the show, not necessarily just the funniest people on the show. And I think that that's hindered comedy a little bit. And I think Toronto has succumbed to that scene somewhat.
The comedy venues here in Toronto, so Second City, Absolute up here near me at Yonge and Eglinton, the Comedy Bar, Yuck Yucks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people, I don't think there's a centralized place to go to get listings to see who's coming to town, who are the regulars, where these spots are. I think a lot of people have no idea of the clubs in Toronto. Could you add any to my little list, or does that cover them? Where else would people...
I think that you've got the entirety of the list. Yeah, Comedy Bar, Yuck Yuck. Oh, there's another place called Comedy Corner.
Okay.
Which is a very small room. I think it holds 20 or 25 people, but they promote more edgy type comedy. And then there's also several weed rooms that are located in Toronto because obviously the laws, now I don't know if they stay the same as when full legalization went into effect. I haven't been to Toronto since that. But there were rooms like the Underground Cafe, which was at Queen and Broadview, and great spaces. Vapor Central, which was on Yonge Street. So there's a whole like weed comedy scene there as well.
You're a cigar guy.
Yeah, I'm smoking one right now.
Now, how healthy is that?
But the doctor told me it's better than vitamins, but I don't know if he's really a doctor.
Right.
It's not that healthy. But
what
I
about
used to
cigarettes?
smoke cigarettes and drink, and I gave them both up on the same day, which was, I believe, February 26th, 5 years ago. And I was like, I'm going to be sober and not smoke cigarettes anymore.
Okay, so how
So I
often...
gave them up, and cigars and coffee are my vice.
Okay, how often with the cigars?
Twice a day.
Mm-hmm. I'm having a
What
cigarette.
are your vices?
I've got lots of them. Yeah, let's just not talk about my vices. But yeah, no, I smoke and the coffee and yeah. So I sort of was planning a bit of an intro. Sometimes I have somebody else read it. Maybe I should just read it and see if I make any errors or there's any absent references here. So Aaron Berg made his Comedy Central debut on Ari Shaffir's This Is Not Happening in 2016. I
would call him Ari Shaffir.
Ari Shaffir. Has made 2 appearances on AXS TV's Live at Gotham.
I would call it Access TV.
Access TV.
See, I'm correcting
so this is
you
great.
as you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful.
Appearance on Big J Okerson's WYFD, which is What's Your Fucking Deal?
Mm-hmm.
One of the stars of the TV show 24 Hour Rental. You're on several episodes of that, airing on Hulu.
Yeah, I was in every episode of that. And it's shot in Hamilton, Ontario, actually.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
Wow.
Lovely town.
Movies is listed on IMDb. You've booked TV shows, movies, personal appearances, starting with Detroit Rock City, The Lookout, The Incredible Hulk, Boondock Saints 2, and in post-production now is The Kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Half of the show In Hot Water, which can only be viewed on Compound Media, it comes out twice a week.
It's 4 times a week now, Monday to Thursday.
Okay. Search for Compound Media on YouTube, and there's samples you can see of the show, and then you click on the link, and you can subscribe to In Hot Water on Compound Media.
Mm-hmm.
You're the author of 2 books currently, Mr.
That's
Manners and American Etiquette. You have 2 albums available on iTunes, or on
3 albums now.
3 albums. What's the third one? I don't have it down here.
Mr. Manners, live from Long Island City.
Yeah.
And there's Unscripted, live from the Comedy Inn. And the first one was Comedy Coltrane.
Okay. And you can get that at Raw Dog, which is on Sirius XM.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You're also the host of Frantic Mondays at the Stand in New York City.
That's correct.
And you do stand-up every night.
That's correct.
And you can be found on Facebook and Twitter as Aaron Berg Comedy.
Yes, indeed. Instagram, too.
Instagram. What are you called on Instagram?
Aaron Berg Comedy.
Okay. Your wife is a working comedian.
Yes.
How do your styles differ?
Actually, pretty similar in style.
Yeah.
She's dirty, very loose. It sounds awful. And in comedy, that's a good thing. In real life, it's not. She's dirty and loose, but very similar styles. I will very rarely have her open for me because we're so similar in style.
Comedians prefer to hang out with other comedians.
Yes, but as you get older at it, you talk less about comedy.
Does it make your relationship easier that both of you are comedians?
No.
No.
Whenever we talk about comedy, it inevitably ends in a fight.
Wow. Why the fight? Is it about what's funny or the line that gets crossed?
Sure, it'll be about what's funny. It'll be competition because I've been doing it longer. So sometimes it becomes competitive, and it's just not a good thing. We've decided we very rarely talk about comedy in this house now.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So she quit her job and is now pursuing it full time, comedy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's a big.
Have you been watching the portal that's plugged in my house?
Well, a little research. You've also been in plays.
Mm-hmm.
2 of them, off Broadway.
A few plays. Yeah, I started in theater back in Toronto. Ran a one-man show off Broadway for a while.
And
a whole bunch of stuff.
Was that stand-up, or were you writing your own plays?
It was a one-man show called The Underbelly Diaries about my time as a male stripper.
I see. So when you come back to Toronto, you're more likely to do Yuck Yucks, or are you... What's your home base here in Toronto for comedy?
I usually do the Yuck Yucks because we have very similar sensibilities comedically. Last time I was there, I did a lovely show called White Guys Matter,
right,
which offended a great deal of people. And it was a great time. It was so fun to stir up that scene and watch people get offended over stuff.
There's a debate with you that's available on YouTube.
Yeah.
I'm looking for her name. But it has you arguing about where the line exists in comedy. Whenever I have that debate, I usually get my ass handed to me.
Hang on 1 second. I'm walking up the stairs and I don't want to wake my baby. I successfully snuck by the baby. Why do you get your ass handed to you?
Well, so... I was raised by a single mother and a feminist. So
yes.
I think I'm pretty schooled in trying to be, fair-minded and liberal-minded. And anyway, so when Andrew Dice Clay came out, I almost fell off my chair.
When did this happen? When did he come out?
When he became
broke
popular.
Big, yeah.
But I'm pretty sure I was laughing for my own reasons. It was the shock value of it. And so when you debate it with people, they can cite lines in his comedy that clearly would qualify as hate speech today and wouldn't really work or play very well today, let's say. And
sure.
And it's easy to lose that argument. And when you're hearing about people's feelings being stepped on or their identities being crushed. I mean, it's hard not to sympathize with that. But
the bottom line is that in the pursuit of equality, people have lost the notion of equality. So when you discuss marginalized groups, like trans people, people of color, myself, who's a Jew and an ex-sex worker, when you want to achieve equality and then you do, and then you change that want from equality to extraordinary treatment, that's where the problem comes in. So if everybody wanted to be equal, then it should be fine to make fun of everybody equally. But some people don't stand for that anymore. And that's where the problem comes in. And comedy needs to be exempt from that, because comedy has traditionally always had a victim. And even if that victim is, a marginalized group or a member of a marginalized group, this notion of punching down isn't really a thing anymore, because the tide has switched so much that it's, now everybody goes after straight white men. They're horrible. So it's only a matter of time until it comes full circle where, straight white, if a fat white guy's in the front row and he gets made fun of by a trans Asian comic, they'll start suing, and it'll be interesting to watch the fallout of that.
Your take on it was that kind of restrictive thinking is a cancer on comedy.
They attempt to set up safe spaces where I believe the woman that I was arguing with was she ran a show where it was like, there's a safe space, there's no rape jokes allowed, it's only queer people allowed on certain nights or whatever it was. And in this attempt to be inclusive, they were excluding several people, so being guilty of their own thing. Somebody last night made this point to me where they said, the guys that wear the MAGA hats that are like, we don't want these immigrants coming in, not all of them. The same thing is happening on the liberal side, where they're like, well, we don't want these words being used, not all of them. So they're guilty of the same thing, but just through a different type of action.
What do you think of this legalization of marijuana, and what is the status of it in New York City? Has it been a big thing?
It's not legal here. You still get a ticket if you smoke marijuana in public. I went to Vancouver several months ago, and I went in and bought a joint, and I'm not a big weed guy. I don't use really any substances. So I just did it for the sake of doing it, and I was like, oh, this is cool. But I don't know what effect it's going to have. I think in terms of taxation, it's probably a good move. But I also think, Toronto's at a point where they've got so many problems with traffic and violence. They need to revamp the system altogether.
Traffic and violence? Do you think there's any connection
Sure.
between...
No, I don't think there's any connection. But I know I've heard from people that live there, like they'll call the cops about like a neighbor dispute, and the cops will be like, "We don't have time to show up.
Right.
There's too many people getting shot and killed."
I
so,
see.
Toronto had it coming. Toronto always wanted to be, New York's little brother, and in attempting to do that and growing so quickly, that's what happens.
Is it visible on the street? I mean, do you smell it on the street? Is it in New York? Does it look like there's a push?
People smoke weed on the street. Yeah.
So eventually New York will cave and fall in line with other states? No?
Yeah.
Or is it too conservative, do you think?
New York is not conservative at all. I think it's just a matter of time.
No, I'm thinking about the state, because when you start thinking about areas in northern New York State, it feels like it's pretty conservative and rural. And
yeah, I agree with you. But, the city is 8 million people, so I think that they're going to have their way eventually. And I think upstate New York has other drug problems. There's a huge heroin epidemic up there and opioids.
Right.
Find us on Twitter at @ThatArcher, our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. Rate the show on iTunes. It changes the way the show is listed.
You and your wife are working comedians. Chances are you're going to raise a comedian. Isn't there a statistical probability there that your daughter could be a comedian there?
It's possible.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to ask was, When I was a kid, in East York, maybe somewhere between 5 and 8 years old, you'd go to the park and there would be sandboxes back then.
Yeah.
You'd pick out the cat turds and kids play in the sandbox. There were always those kids that as soon as they got a hold of a toy, they go on an improv rant. And I knew right away, I don't have that. And I think you're born with it. So my question is, how do you spot a kid who is potentially maybe a natural, rather than just dismiss them as silly?
As you said that.
Oh,
you hear?
Yeah.
She just started crying as you said that. You've put the fear of Milton Berle into her. My daughter is very funny, and she laughs a lot. And,
Yeah.
Let me see. Let me go ask her. Hang on. My wife is going to get her. So she's, Christine, I'm speaking with somebody, and they just asked, do you think that your daughter would become a comedian? And how would you know? What? She says no. Did you say no, hon? No. She said no. She may have the sensibility for it, but I don't think I don't think it'll happen. You never know. We don't want her to be a Pauly Shore. I think if she was edgy, then it'd be okay.
Yeah. But do you think there's traits that surface early in comedians?
I don't know. I never thought I was going to be a comedian. I was funny in school, but
do you think?
Sure. And genetically, it's possible she may have it.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that you use comedy or your sense of humor as a social currency when you were in high school or school? To me,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's probably an indicator.
It's it was like a defense mechanism, and it was also a way to socialize, and definitely, it was definitely.
If you can make a girl laugh, you're half the way there.
Yeah, but in high school, I don't think that girls really liked funny guys. I think that came later in life.
You have a degree in philosophy. How do you apply that to your comedy, or do you?
Yeah, it's all about thinking outside of the box and taking different views at everything. So I think it really, in terms of comedy, it leads you to question everything and go against the mainstream. And now in America, most mainstream comedians have this, I want to call it a liberal view, but it's not anymore, because liberalism when we grew up was, about freedom and about being who you are and pushing the envelope. And now it's changed to where almost, conservative viewpoints are more akin to that. So I think to think against whatever everybody else is thinking and to be able to make some kind of logical reasoning and then turn that funny, which is the end goal.
It's a weird time where, for liberals, the last bastion of hope is the CIA and the FBI.
Yeah, it's ironic now, and it's it's not going to happen. He's not getting impeached, and I think people that put all those eggs in that basket are barking up the wrong tree. Now, I think that the hope is, when you watch, I watched the State of the Union last week, and it was the most unified speech that he'd made to this point, I think. But that being said, you need somebody on the other side that's going to be logical and not like way out there. And I think that enough people would be willing to vote for somebody else if they were presented a viable option.
Were you staring at Nancy Pelosi the whole time, watching her expression?
No, I did watch that hand clap, which was very interesting, and I watched all the women dressed in white being very happy and very eccentric. And it's definitely a fun time. And I'll tell you this, it's a great time to be doing comedy. A lot of people think it's not, but Ari Shaffir, I think, told Joe Rogan this, and he says it's a great time to do comedy because, it's dangerous again.
Mm-hmm.
You can get in trouble for one thing that you say. You're rolling the dice with your career over one tweet. So it's and as such, I've stopped tweeting my more offensive stuff because all context is lost in 140 or 280 characters.
You were taking some heat for the comedy that you do?
Mm-hmm.
And it started
more
to...
so, look, people in clubs do not complain about
Right.
comedy because everybody's laughing. But, broader strokes, when I did the show called White Guys Matter,
Yeah.
we got in trouble for that because people were like it's unsensitive to blah, blah, blah. And everybody brings their own narrative to the title of a show instead of watching the show and just saying, oh, it's a collection of very different people, even though they're white men, and they're just being funny. So that was weird to watch, and then I've gotten in trouble for some tweets I've made before that all very clearly hit close to home. And you also learn about this stuff on Twitter is it's not real. As much as people want to make you think it's real, it's not real. It's just because everybody's got an opinion now, and most people aren't qualified to have those opinions believed. But it's a slippery slope. If you really invest in social media, it can also bring you down very quickly. You look at Roseanne or somebody like that.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if, of all the arts, if it's possible that comedy is one of the most subjective, in that the reasons why you like or don't like it as an art is so peculiar to the individual. Do you think it's more? I'm just thinking more people are likely to crowd around a Rembrandt painting
Sure.
and agree, whereas it divides the crowd, comedy itself. Maybe it always has.
Yeah, and I think people with their own baggage would be affected by a joke, but also some people that have been through the most will laugh the hardest and at a wider range of things because they've been through the most. Like we're talking about this last night, doing an All Blacks show, those people will laugh really hard. Doing a Narcotics Anonymous show, those people will laugh really hard. People that have known real struggle and real strife are more in touch with comedy than people that haven't really had to fight. And they just pick a battle with comedy instead of real life.
I think it's Nick DiPaolo, on a podcast recently suggested that it's mostly white women who complain at the comedy clubs, who go up to the manager and file a complaint, and that demographics, the same demographic that's likely to go home and watch Special Victims Unit and Law and Order and CSI and get into the 10,000 deaths a night thing, but you can't say shit. Or
right.
And she's complaining about groups that she isn't necessarily a part of, this proverbial complainer. I've always been fascinated with this, the number of deaths or violences or autopsies, but you can't show a tit or say shit on TV.
I mean, Lenny Bruce used to have a bit about it where he's like he'd much rather have his kid watching somebody making love than, a horror movie. So it's the notion that's been around for some time. And it's true. You'd rather have offensive language than offensive, violent actions.
You just recalled Lenny Bruce. Another question is, do comedians need almost photographic memory? Not only to remember their bits and their skits and ideas that come to them, but knowing whose joke belongs to who and when you step on another comedian's product.
I think you have to be aware of it. I don't know if it's photographic memory, but I'm also very bad at learning and memorizing stuff now. I used to be good at it, but most of my stuff is improvised and in the moment now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of born of laziness, but it's also the fact that I've embraced uncertainty so fully that that's where I'm at my best, is not knowing where I'm going and not knowing what I'm going to say. And that's what makes me the best comedian I can be, rather than having prepared monologues. But it's rare. There's not a lot of people that do that. So I think in terms of theft, it's less of a thing than it used to be. I think more people step on similar premises now. But Gad Amala just got called out. He's a Moroccan comedian that is primarily in French, and he was stealing word-for-word bits from George Carlin, Jerry Seinfeld, a whole bunch of French-Canadian comedians. So it still exists, but, you know, the comedy world's got bigger problems. I joke that, you know, when Gad Amala got caught stealing, you know, people would probably be more offended by, like, hey, why didn't you steal jokes from any women? Are you a misogynist? So I feel like that's what the attack would be now, instead of like, hey, it's not right to steal.
You've moved to Forest Hills. And I thought, wow, fancy, because, you know, Toronto's Forest Hill. What's your new neighborhood like? Forest Hills.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Very, a tree-lined street, and it's beautiful. It's quiet. It's very suburban, yet very close to the city.
Like Oakville type?
No, I wouldn't go that far. It's still New York. It's Queens.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not, you don't get a ton of land, but it's nice. It's just nice to not have sirens whizzing by all the time and homeless people pooping on your step.
Yeah. Did you become a U.S. citizen? Are you gone for permanently? What's the deal?
Not yet. No, I've become a citizen in, I think, 3 years.
Yeah.
In 3 years, yeah.
Will that be a dual? How will that work? You have to. I think you have to renounce one, don't you, these days?
No, I think you can be a dual citizen, but I think for tax purposes, it makes more sense to renounce one.
Yeah. Your comedy influences when you were a kid?
The primary one was Richard Pryor. I mean, the greatest of all time in my mind. Sam Kinison for a while, Lenny Bruce for a while. I thought Andrew Dice Clay was great when I was younger. You know, there was something about selling out auditoriums and, you know, having people know every joke that you were doing. There's something cool about that.
In the late 80s, there was Live at the Improv and a whole bunch of TV shows that gave, I think they're probably 5-minute spots to a whole wide range of comedians. And we were almost saturated. It was on the pay TV stations, you know, sort of all night long. So, and that's where you would see Kinison and any number of them. Was that a way? Did you guys have those pay TV stations?
Yeah, I don't think Kinison ever did Evening at the Improv. I think he did Rodney Dangerfield's specials. But Evening at the Improv, sure, very influential. But it was a lot of cookie-cutter stuff back then, and many of those people went on to become huge stars. Yeah. But you'd watch a lot of similar stuff, and that was the notion of what a stand-up comic was in the 80s. And then it changed and became more about storytelling and longer bits, and then crowd work became a real thing. Like, people had really evolved at crowd work.
So did you have access to all of that when you were younger, living at home maybe?
Yeah, I used to watch Evening at the Improv, and I used to, you know, the big thing was, and so many comics have said this, I'd sneak downstairs and watch Richard Pryor when it was on HBO or whatever it was at the time. So I think back then it was the Movie Network in Canada. And Super Channel. With that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And so things like SCTV, SNL, were you glued to that stuff?
Grew up watching SCTV. Yeah, loved it.
You'd never miss.
Knew every episode. Loved it. So good.
No, SNL has a few dry episodes now and then.
Oh, SNL has tons of horrible episodes, but SCTV was a classic, and you know, it was this great form of Canadiana that influenced so many people. The morning show I do in Hot Water is, you know, so I think so strongly influenced in my subconscious by what my notion of funny is through watching SCTV.
Are you too young to have caught the reruns of Carol Burnett? Was that a big influence when you were a kid?
I used to watch them sometimes early evenings at home, but I never got that into it.
Yeah. There's some pretty funny bits she did.
Mm-hmm.
And what about New Kids in the Hall? Was that big for you? Did you think that you used any of those?
What do you mean, Kids in the Hall? New Kids in the Hall was New Kids on the Block.
I'm screwing up.
Kids in the Hall was good. I didn't get as into it as I did SCTV.
Yeah. What's next for you? What's coming up?
I'll take a nap.
No.
After I get off the phone with you, and then what's next for me? I got a series coming out on Showtime with my wife this year.
Wow.
And I can't talk more about it, but that I've got I'm working on a new hour, so I'm trying to figure out how to put that together. And I'm going to tour the United States with In Hot Water Live. We go around the most major cities and do a live podcast and then do a stand-up show afterwards. So it's great. And we have, the best fans in the world. Our fans are really funny and really know comedy. And they're very irreverent, politically incorrect. So it's great that we were able to do what we think is funny and have people enjoy it.
There's something particularly interesting about you and how you mix with your co-host, Gino Bisconti. You're the perfect match. Even the tonality of your voices are separate enough. I mean, everything about it seems like a great match for In Hot Water.
Yeah. I said the story of how the podcast started was we were at the Stand Comedy Club, and I go, I never thought of doing a podcast, but if I did, I would do one with you. And he goes, I'd be into it. And I go, yeah? I go, what if we do it in my hot tub? Call it In Hot Water. And as we said that, Jeffrey Gurian, the writer from the Interrobang, was there, and he goes, did I hear you guys are doing a podcast? And I go, yeah. And he wrote about it. And he goes, Gino and Aaron are starting a podcast. And I think we did 3 or 4 episodes on a computer. And then Anthony Cumia had to go to rehab. And Gino and I had separate occasions, sat in for Anthony and guest hosted. And then we got picked up at Compound Media. And since then, it's just been great. We're very different people. Yeah. But we jive really well. We're both kind of old school comics, seat of our pants guys, and it really comes together really well. Us just talking is really funny.
If on YouTube you go to Compound Media, just search for it. There's some samples of the bits you do. You do a Jesus one. There's a quadriplegic. Oh,
we did. Yeah, God got me too'd, which was interesting. That one was really fun. And then, there's the quadriplegic that wanted to try gay porno.
Yeah. One of them that was shocking was the Goodwill bin, a donation bin.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I forgot about that. Chrissy Mayer did that. Yeah.
So
those Canadian stories.
It's not that you work up to the line and help society define where the line is. You purposely cross
way
it.
Over the line.
Yeah.
We there is no line for us, so we go as far as we used to have a segment called Rape of the Day, where we would just pluck out from the news, the best rape of that day and make fun of it. So it's whatever we are told not to do, we go way further.
Well, is there any way to take that and argue that you're bringing attention to an issue rather than us all just forget about it in this 24-hour news cycle where we have a one-day attention span? You at least are bringing attention to the shocking nature of the stories. Is there any way to make it a redeemable bit to do?
Yeah, but I also think that it redeems itself by being funny. I think that the hardest thing to do, and years ago coming up, was like, how do you make that funny? If you took something really dark, and a lot of people didn't have the answer for that. So as comedians, you try and work at making the things that are the darkest and the most disturbing as funny as possible. And in that regard, I think that it is redeeming and that we're successful. It's, and not everybody's going to like it. You have to deal with that. That takes years to get to, where you go, oh, okay, I'm not for everybody. And once you have that, you're able to work in a much clearer stratosphere because you're not trying to please everybody, which makes the comedy much purer.
In your debate with Jesse
Beaulieu, Jess Beaulieu,
you argued that you put comedy ahead of all else.
Sure,
you're a comedian.
Funny first. You're in comedy, it's funny first.
And that's where
to differ on that.
Yeah, that seems to be the center of the entire debate.
Yeah,
really.
It's not even just a verbalization of an argument. The fact is, if you put someone that doesn't believe that, and you put someone that does believe that in a room full of strangers, no matter what the composition of that room, no matter what marginalized communities are in that room, you're going to win out because those people will be laughing, and the person that puts restrictions on their art aren't going to be as funny.
You were asked by Now magazine, what do you miss most having left Canada? And you said the keg, Cora's, the Leafs, the Queen's Quay, and your friends and driving. But it's interesting, Cora's, that's a pizza place at Harvard and Spadina.
No, it's the breakfast place I was talking about.
Oh. There's another
But
Cora's.
I used to order Cora's when I lived at Dundas and Gladstone.
Yeah.
Because they would deliver late night and I'd get an extra cheese pizza all the time. And it used to be $10 or $11.
Where's Cora's, the breakfast place? Is it still around?
I think there's several of them in Toronto.
Okay. I haven't seen that one.
Yeah.
The Queen's Quay? Why?
I lived down on Queen's Quay for several years.
Yeah.
I was dating Lauren Ash, who is now on a show called Superstore on NBC. And we were living together. It was such a great area.
Yeah.
You know, I had the water right there, and I lived in this beautiful building with a gym and a pool, and it was just great. Before that, I lived in an artist garret, like an attic that I was paying $450 a month for. Unheard of prices.
In like an old warehouse, a bomb-making factory?
No, it was a house at Dundas and Gladstone. You had to walk up like 3 levels.
How much politics do you inject into your comedy, do you think? With the Trumps and Canadian news?
Yeah, I think that there's an overwhelming sensibility there, but it's not day to day, and I'm not covering what's happening in Congress and passing bills. But I do think that there's the notion of rebellion and just seeing the things that are affected by the presidency and bringing those in. So being able to joke about all the stuff that the president has strong viewpoints on, I think that affects comedy.
And so would you, for joking purposes, side with some of his arguments? Like, I mean, at one point you threatened that you watch Fox News.
Yeah.
That can't be true.
Yeah, I'll watch Fox News sometimes. I'll also watch CNN. I'll watch MSNBC because, less of MSNBC because Rachel Maddow's not a very attractive man. But it gets to the point sometimes where, too much news is bad. So I'll shut all that off and just really live in the moment and look at the actual behaviors of society, and you'll see, what you're seeing on the news is not really what's happening in front of you. So it's good. Now that I have balance, I'm able to see that much more clearly.
I've noticed on all of these shows on cable news, whether it's Wolf Blitzer or MSNBC, it's always the host is on one side of the desk, and then there's 3 or 4 panelists on the other side of the desk. And I've been noticing this I've only really noticed this for last year, but I notice 100 out of 100 times. The guest pundits are arranged by hotness. The closest person, check it out, any cable news show, they'll put the older guy, the crusty older guy, the furthest away. The next one in is a little more fuckable. The next one in, and by the time it's going to be the hottest chick in a profile with the legs showing under the desk and her hotness on display. And they're organized that way 100 out of 100 times. Someone's got to write a joke about that.
I will look for that next time I watch.
And it ain't going to be me. But
okay.
All right. So then, Canadian news. I don't know if you keep an eye on up here, but right now the government might fall because of a controversy over SNC-Lavalin. Do you keep up with any of the latest in Canadian politics?
No. Tell me about it. Give me the cliff notes on it real quickly.
How familiar are you with SNC-Lavalin?
I'm not.
Well, they get it. They're like one of 3 corporations here in Canada, like SNC-Lavalin, TransCanada, and AECon. So any project anywhere in Canada, whether building a jail or whatever it is, or a nuclear power plant, or a subway, or the 407, it always falls on these corporations. But SNC-Lavalin has been found guilty of fraud in foreign nations and fraud and crimes in Canada. And the rule is that because most of their work is all government contracts, you are ineligible for government contracts if you're convicted for a crime, especially if you're a corporation. So the thing about SNC-Lavalin is that one of the crimes is campaign finance donations that are exceeding their limits and undisclosed and illegal. But they give to both parties. So the reason why I'm interested in SNC-Lavalin is because I'm sort of part-time a anti-nuclear activist, and they were given AECL, which is the entity that designed the CANDU nuclear reactor and built all the reactors in Canada. They were given it by Harper for $1. So that's why I keep an eye on SNC-Lavalin. But SNC-Lavalin's banned by the World Bank for World Bank funded projects. Anyway, the controversy was that there's something called a non-prosecution agreement, and corporations sometimes will apply for it and they won't be prosecuted and therefore get around this rule that if you're convicted of a crime, you can't get government contracts. So there's this idea that Trudeau, who accepted a $100,000 donation from SNC-Lavalin, which could itself be illegal, put pressure on the Minister of Justice at the time to go ahead with this non-prosecution agreement, and that is improper because there's supposed to be no political pressure. Anyway, so as soon as she basically said we're not going to proceed with a non-prosecution agreement, Trudeau shuffled her out of her cabinet and put in another Attorney General and Minister of Justice who would go ahead with the NPA. And so now this has all hit the news. And the interesting thing about it for me is that we're going to focus on who knew what when and who told what when and what pressure was applied and all that, but we're never going to talk about the crimes and the illegality of SNC-Lavalin. While the U.S. government was hunting down Gaddafi and his two sons, SNC-Lavalin was shuttling his sons around Libya to evade the U.S. war machine.
So you're saying Canada is becoming more American.
This is what I'm saying. And that's people have been asking, why am I so covering Trump so much and so focused? It's because we haven't had a big scandal. Canadian politics has been boring for the last several years, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's good to be boring, right?
Well, not anymore. The government might topple over this. So it's big news up here.
Oh, wow. All right, I'll look more into it. I just thought that the Prime Minister was going around dressed as the Village People to a whole bunch of events.
Apparently, he used to be a bouncer. Apparently, Justin's a pretty tough guy.
Really?
Getting into fist fights with, I think he challenged another minister to a conservative or something, MP, to a boxing match, and I think he won.
Oh, that's great.
He's a tough guy. He's not just a school teacher, you know. Anyway.
I did not know that. I want to look more into Canadian politics and how interesting they're getting now.
No, don't hold your breath.
Right.
Anyway, so that's the latest thing in Canada.
Very exciting.
Wow, thank you for taking the time to speak to me. I hope your daughter and wife and everything is going well in New York. And keep up the great work.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
All right. That was Aaron Berg, broadcaster, author, actor, and stand-up comedian. Google him or check the show notes for more information. Performed on Ari Shafir's This Is Not Happening, Access TV's Live at Gotham, Comedy Central's Roast Battle Season 2. He has 3 albums: Comedy Coltrane, Unscripted, and Mr. Manners. 2 books, Mr. Manners and American Etiquette. 4 days a week, Aaron Berg and Gino Bisconte host In Hot Water. Search for Compound Media on YouTube for some samples and skits, and sign up and never miss it and other shows on compoundmedia.com. We reached Aaron Berg by phone in Queens, New York.
Find us on Twitter @thatarcher. Send us an email, archer@twxnet.com. For guest links and contact info, visit our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. Find us on Android and Apple Podcast apps. Subscribe and rate the show on iTunes.
This has been TMI.